On day 23, we'll be drawing our relationship map. This map is meant to offer you a high degree of predictability. Writing it while you're writing chapter 7 is now possible because your story is mature enough. This map will help you to revise the story you're actually writing and review its coherence, its consistency, and its global cohesion, and it will help you to have more clarity on your future stories. By predicting which new choice you're likely to make, by offering you a clear frame for comparison in the relationship between the character in each of your new stories. This map is a comparative tool, allowing you to track the evolution of the character roles you'll be using through your different stories. Now, we'll put the emphasis on roles here. Functions are meant to be useful. They are useful when you're writing your characters because they help you to understand point of view and change of perspective. But they'll never be as important as roles are when it comes to character's definition and character's identity. So when it will come to define the level of affinity between two characters, the behavior traits attached to a role and the behavior traits of the individual characters will be the defining factor of the affinity. Same for the potential alignment. The motivation of a character, so the motivation emerging from the character's role, will be a defining factor when it comes to alignment and the conjoined alignment of two characters, their likelihood to become aligned, to become part of the same organization. Since motivation is directly related to goal and interest, motivation, defined by the role, is an essential piece of information when it comes to defining the degree of attachment of two characters. And since the role defines the motivation and 2 out of 4 behavior traits, it will, in most cases, define the influence a character can have onto another. Now, we've talked about influence, influence like this in our previous lesson, the lesson on the second encore. And influence was defined through attachment. Influence was defined through the means of reaction. The attachment between two characters will suggest a future reaction that the character can have if one of them is in a dangerous situation, for example, or if one of them is supposedly in danger, threatened the other character, because she's attached to this first character, will react in a certain manner. And it will all be dependent on the situation and on the perspective of both characters on the situation, which will cause conflict. Now, as a starter, we'll get back to the 6th role we presented you previously, and we'll focus for now on the notions of affinity, alignment, and how they articulate with each other. Now, let's start with 6th character, and from there extend to 12. Now, if we only have 6 characters, and this logic also works if you choose to have only 4 main characters, you just cut 2 out of these 6, or you choose to keep the additional 2 and you make them secondary characters. What should we do to imagine, to envision the relationships between one role and another, the potential affinities, the potential alignment of one role towards the other? But it will have to do with the appearance of the character, with the visual appearance of the character, with her body, with her face, but it will have more to do with her behavior traits. Now let's start as usual with the rival. Which kind of rival do we have? So the traditional rival here, the minimum rival, the minimum level of rival here, has a direct relationship with both the leader and the arbiter because of her behavior traits. But now let's suppose we're adding her 2 more behavior traits to make her a full character. So we have a relentless character. The counterpart of relentless here is reckless, but we also have an endurant character. So that's our second strength. And being endurant makes her a little rough around. So, which profile does it correspond to the most? Well, if you look at the word we're using here, you may say, okay, it would be a high degree of ability with a sponsor character, because endurance and resilience work with one another. And it's simply that, if you want to predict the degree of affinity, the degree of the potential of alignment of 2 characters, you just look at their behavioral trait, because their behavioral trait will command their behavior in a due situation, their reaction in a due situation, and this will lead to more attachment, more affinity, more alignment, and so on. Now let's try to find another kind of character which will go well with this. So the endurant part, that's for the sponsor. But you may also consider, if we are still going through the direct connection between 2 characters, that the rough part may go well. It may complement the enthusiastic part of the Enticer. So by being rough, this character is likely to attract an Enticer, to attract the sympathy of an Enticer, which may see a character which is suffering here, for example. Now, if we go through the leader, now let's complete our leader. We have a devoted leader, which may push her to be excessively sacrificial. But what do we have? Okay, she's participative. So she asks other members of her team for their insight. And she's also a little, let's say, curious. So, the first trait, the participative trait, it's a trait of openness. It's a trait which allows her to get really on with her peers, so that will attract an advisor. No, that's the empathetic nature of the advisor which is speaking here, the participative, because this leader, this specific leader that we created here, wants the best outcome for her team, for her companions. Now, the curious part, obviously you may say, okay, that's an Enticer. Yes, but not only. No, curious here, maybe a trait you find in an Arbiter, even if it doesn't seem very obvious at first. But the detached nature of the Arbiter, this part, is guided by curiosity, or said in another way, by the fact that the Arbiter, to some degrees, is quite open in terms of new possibilities. Since the Arbiter is looking for the most efficient outcome for the world, in terms of resource use, she has to consider new possibilities. She has to consider new solution before taking a decision. So she has to be curious to some degree. And since here, because this curious here, it's not the same curious as what an enticer would do. A curious enticer would not necessarily attract an arbiter, but a curious leader, since leaders have already this structure, this mental structure of dedication, of management, they could attract an arbiter because of that, because they have this long-term vision. Now we'll skip Enticer for now, and we'll go straight to the advisor. Now, what if we want our advisor to evolve? Well, we could try to make her a little more individualistic. And this may look like it's opposed to empathy. It may look like it's opposed to attachment. Well, it's not. Individualism here means that she's more likely to envision each character's individual needs and wants, rather than consider the collective needs and wants. So if there's an opposition here, not between being empathetic or not being empathetic, but between considering the individuals before the collective. So that's a trait which will attract this kind of character, which is the most individualistic kind of character here. But it may also attract an arbiter, because arbiters by their nature have to consider the needs of each individual before taking a decision for the collective. That's the internal, that's the inner synergy of the arbiter that this advisor would be talking to directly. She considered the needs of each one in order to ensure the balance of many. So that's multiple example of how you create affinities between your characters based directly on their behavior traits. Now let's use the 3 remaining characters to create an affinity system and an alignment system, but based only on looks, based only on visuals. So you have a larger picture. So now let's suppose our arbiter is our advisor is the agility type. Who does that attract? Who does agility attract? Well, normally it would attract both an influence type and a speed type. That's the regular two. So now here, who would be the speed type? Well, you could say this person would be a speed type, because that's the role which suited the most, but this person could also be a speed type. And this person could be a speed type, any of them really, but let's say the rival and the enticer are the more likely to be speed oriented or strength. And who would be an influence type? Well, the arbiter, obviously, but also the sponsor. So based on looks, based on the visual representation, these 4 characters are more likely to develop an affinity, or more likely to be aligned with the advisor than a leader, for example. But in this example, the leader and the advisor will develop their relationship through a common behavior trait, or a very similar behavior trait. So you see that there's already multiple ways, in fact there's 3 ways to develop relationship between your characters. They could go for the first impression and try to develop their relationship from now, or they can have an already established relationship and try to cultivate it in a certain manner, which may reinforce or weaken the relationship according to their choices, according to their reactions. Now, last thing on Enticer and Arbiter. When you have these two traits, these two traits are direct opposites from one another, they're complementary. Then there's a way, there's a thing that these two have in common. And that's their love for balance. And balance here, when it comes to the Arbiter, is something that's absolutely necessary to be equitable. Balance is the core of equity here. But think about what's an enticer. An enticer is motivated by discovery. An enticer wants to find new territories. An enticer wants to explore. An enticer is enthusiastic, and she's fervid. So an enticer wants to play. She wants to play games. And when it comes to games, balance is an absolutely critical factor. So if the enticer wants to be entertained, she wants to play games, she wants to explore, she has to do it in at least one way, because an enticer is quite difficult to canalize. But there's one thing that she will always be attracted to. It's balance. There's also reliability, but balance is the common trait here. So same thing for all the other pairs. You always have something that's directly linking to opposites. For example, when it comes to leader and sponsors, the legacy is what motivates them. Even if legacy here is more of a sponsor type of word, the leader, if she's a manager, if she's a proper sustainable manager, she's trying to create a legacy as well. Not necessarily in the same manner, because she may be giving too much of herself to her team, contrary to the sponsor. But they're both pursuing the same ideal. The possibilities of alignment and affinity creation between characters based on the role are quite numerous. If we only limit ourselves to interactions between roles and visual profiles, you can reach quite fast something between 60 and 17 type of different combinations. So now for our next part on developing 12 characters out of 6, we'll limit ourselves to the most obvious example. And that's what we recommend you to use in your first story, so that you can more easily twist it in your future story. So, a rival is more likely to attract strength-based character, whereas a leader is more likely to attract both strength and speed kind of characters. Enticer, speed only or speed mostly. Advisor, agility because of the flexibility of her mind. Sponsor, both agility and influence, because she wants to have the most option out of all these 6 characters. And finally, Arbiter, influence mostly. Now, these are all the main visual profiles towards which these 6 roles are most attracted. Now, what about the other roles? So the rules by which these characters are most attracted are for the rival, Arbiter, leader, and advisor. For the leader, rival, enticer, and sponsor. Enticer, same thing, the two adjacent, and the direct opposite. And every time you have to create an antagonist, a support, or a menace for each of your characters, you can make use of this system directly. You can say, okay, I have two characters which are just around my characters, and their roles are, for example, they're an advisor, they're an arbiter. So these will be my support and my threat. And maybe here my menace, since she's directly opposite to my character, could be a leader. No. Or same thing for the arbiter. I have an arbiter protagonist, so maybe my threat, my antagonist will be a rival because of the way she behaves, which is irresponsible. But still, I have some form of attraction for her because I find her funny. And my reliable, my resilient support, my true friend is a sponsor, since she corresponds much more to what I need or what I want. Really, it depends. Maybe the character bearing the behavior trait you need is the rival in this case, because your arbiter is too rigid, too psycho-rigid, and the rival may be a solution for her to become more flexible. And in any case, my direct opposite, my antipod, is an enticer, because she represents everything that I can't stand for. Everything that's absolutely inexcusable. That's an enticer for me, because my main character, my protagonist, is an arbiter. So that's an easy way to create your 12 characters. And, well, really, we say 12, but if we count, how many characters do you have here? No, but because each of the 3 characters added here in each part of our quadrant, these are 3 additional characters, really. So, really, we don't have 12 characters here. We have 24. So you have here an easy way to create up to 24 different characters, knowing that in every situation, these characters will not have the same behavior trait in definitive, because as we've shown previously, if you're creating here 4 different rivals, your 4 different rivals should have different behavior traits. Your main rival, here the rival represented in red, the bigger R here in this quadrant, will have 2 individual traits, which will be, for example, what we got just before was endurant and rough. That's your first rival. But the second rival, for example, will be something like protective. She will be maybe more assertive. The third one may be a little more competitive, and the fourth one maybe an encouraging rival, So that's 4 different kinds of rival. And same thing for every other role. You can have a dedicated leader every time, but one of these leaders may be much more of a manager, and she may go along much more with the sponsor. She may not be opposite to the sponsor in a way to approach things, because if the sponsor here is supposed to be an extremely resilient character, an extremely calculating character, she may go along with the plan devised by a manager leader, a leader which calculates risk before taking it, which is still dedicated to her team, but dedicated in a more quantified manner. That's the kind of leader that could really pair well with a sponsor. And once you have all these characters, what do you add on top of that? Well, on top of that, you had your world map. And for more ease of visualization, you can just go through these territories. Again, you look for what you're aiming to get out of these territories, and you can directly place, your different characters. So, for example, these characters, the characters in the bottom left, all of them. So that's for us 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say 7 characters. These 7 characters are living in their archipelago. You've already devised the place they're living in, and by adding these layers just like that. And same thing for the others. These characters, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6, you have to be flexible with that because it will never properly align. You have these 6 characters which are living in the mountain region, and 2 of them are living in the mine, very specifically, and by just superposing your maps like that, your relationship map and your world map, you're not only having all the characters, you're having all the characters in their places of origin, in the places they are born. And that's giving you their stories, because if you now have all your characters in the places they're born, you know how they're supposed to act, because you've devised these places to be quite diverse, quite different, opposite in their function sometimes. And really, that's just almost all the work done, because you've placed all your characters in their environment. Now, it may not always be the origins of the character. For example, if we take all our character in the green region, in the floating gardens, all these characters, the Enticer, the leader, the Arbiter, and the advisor in the bottom right corner, these 4 characters, they may only be visiting this region. And since they're visiting all the same region, they can meet each other. And now if they can meet each other, they can interact with each other. And if they can interact with each other, they can get close to each other, they can develop conflict, they can develop affinities, they can develop alignment. And that's what the superposition of these 2 maps allow you to do. Not only that, now that we have our visual profiles stamped over our different regions, you can consider that these regions, the people of these regions, are more likely to be of these visual profiles, allowing you to create a more diverse visual identity to all of your characters, to all of the inhabitants of your world, to all of the people, the species, even if you have this kind of system in your world. So just by superposing those 2 maps, you have, I'd say, most of the work done. You only have to write the dialogues at this point. You have to add some elements of description because you want to describe the environments and to some extent the characters, but then it's all about dialogues. Once you've superposed the world map and the relationship map, you just have to deal with the dialogues and the action scenes, but that's for another lesson.